The Planning Committee meeting of the 14th of June. We have with us Alderman Zuko, Councillor Elliott, Councillor Sherlock, Councillor Basalt, Alderman Bloomfield, Councillor Kelly, Councillor Lohberger, Councillor Harvey, the Deputy Lord Mayor. Can we start off with confirmation of minutes from the previous meeting?
So moved.
Thank you, Deputy. All those in favour say aye. Aye. And say no. Carried unanimously. Next, we have consideration of supplementary items. I don't believe we do not. Part 3, indications of pecuniary conflicts of interest. Does anybody have an interest they need to declare? Nope. Very good. Transfer of agenda items. I don't think there's... Unless anyone has anything? Nope. Consideration of items of deputations. I don't believe there are any. So we move straight to committee acting as a planning authority. We'll go straight to item 6.1.1. Argyle Street, Campbell Street, Liverpool Street, Bathurst Street, new bike lanes.
Happy to move the item for approval.
Any debate or questions? Councillor Basalt?
Yeah, well, no, wait, we're at planning. I can stay seated. I was just going to get out and thank the staff primarily. So I just wanted to say thank you. It's great to see these bike lanes finally come to fruition and come to formal planning. Most of the representations were positive with some recommendations for making them even better. But it's terrific to see the first separated cycle lanes going through planning tonight. So a really big thanks to the team for putting that together.
Are there any other questions or comments? Councillor Harvey.
Yeah, I'll echo Councillor Salt's comments. It's been a long time coming. I think these lanes have been on the books for a number of years, progressing slowly forward, and it's good to see them finally here at the last stage. I assume this is the last stage, Director? Planning stage?
Certainly last planning stage. Obviously there are procurement and other measures that need to be adhered to before construction can get underway.
Yep, okay. But this just helps with the trend across the whole country with trying to make streets safer for pedestrians and for cyclists, and separating bike riders from cars is hugely important. I think we all know that, and we've been listening to the advice over the years that separated bike lanes encourage people to ride. People are more inclined to ride when they feel safe on the streets and don't have to mix it with cars. So to separate bike riders from cars is hugely important in encouraging those riders who are not confident in order to get on their bikes and participate in cycling. So I applaud the staff for getting it to this point, and I'm hopeful that this will be fully supported tonight around the table. Thanks, Chairman.
Any other comment? Councillor Elliott.
I just wanted to confirm, I had an email with the Director this afternoon, and just the situation around parking. Just confirm the situation is that there is effectively no change to parking, there's no parking loss as a result of this application. Is that correct?
The application only relates to land within the Solomons Cove planning scheme area. So, and I'm sorry, I'm just looking at the detail of which we provided you this afternoon. So just bear with me.
Thank you.
I want to be clear.
Okay, hold on. Yep. I've just forwarded that email to all other elected members too, because I didn't realise that went down quite considerably with the detail.
Yes.
So it's 17, in summary, no parking spaces are lost.
Yeah.
17 two-hour spaces will become clearways from 4:30 till 6, Monday to Friday. So it's lost for that time period.
Yeah, that's correct. So there's two existing 5-minute parking spaces on Campbell Street will become clearways from 4:30 p.m. to 6 p.m. Monday to Friday, and the existing 60-metre long bus zone on the west side of Argyle Street will be reduced to 35-metre long. I notice there's an error there. 3 buses will capacity from 3 buses to 2 buses. Okay, yep. Yeah, so 2 buses there.
Thank you. So yeah, my comments on this is that I do support separated cycleways, just where there is a loss of parking, especially where it's getting into like double digits, that I think we need to make sure we factor in compensating for that loss, especially in the planning that we do around the inner city precincts plan and things like that, because I do know that it's a build it and they will come type thing with bike lanes, but the vast majority of our community still do and will continue to rely on cars. So, thanks.
Alderman Bloomfield.
I've been trying to find, like when Councillor Eric said build it and they will come, it also appears that traffic analysis will not be done until afterwards either, because 4.2.8 appears to be the only mention of such, but it doesn't specify, particularly from what I can see, that there has been an analysis of what impact this will have. And in particular, we drive through Campbell Street quite regularly, and Argyle Street in particular as well. Those two areas were renowned for gridlock, so we're going to make it worse because we're actually going to choke it further. I'm just finding that a little bit odd, that we're not actually ascertaining what the true impact will be, because surely we can't be encouraging further gridlock.
Okay, a couple of things. That is not a discretion or aspect that we as a planning authority have jurisdiction over in this point. And there was a detailed traffic impact assessment done of this proposal back in 2021 that satisfied council, the officers, that by ensuring that we have those clearways at those peak periods, that we can not gridlock the city. It's fair to say that state government were keen to ensure that that was the case, and we convinced them at the time, and we also convinced the elected members that that would not be the case. So we've carefully designed this in a way to ensure that that is not the case.
Deputy.
Thank you, Chair. Look, I'd just like to make a couple of comments in relation to those points. It is quite clear from these plans that the clearway and the flow of traffic is going to be quite clear along, particularly in front of TAFE, but around that area. So, I mean, the whole idea is to try and give people alternatives when this kind of application comes before us. It gives people alternatives to ride and to have safe passage when they ride. I certainly use these bike lanes very regularly, or the current bike lanes, and having that, from a personal rider's perspective, I feel that having some greater safety will be of benefit. And you might, from the representations that we saw, that we all would have read, it's quite clear. Most of them, I think, are from women who are particularly looking for safety, and they're often used as a litmus test for having safety on the road. So, number one, this is a careful design looking at in making sure that the flow of traffic is continued. But number two, it provides that real alternative and safe alternative for people to traverse into the city and maybe out of their cars. Just a number of kilometres on a bike is of greater benefit rather than having another car on the road. So I really, again, support and reiterate the thanks to staff for bringing this to us. I think it's a really considered application, and I'll certainly be supporting it tonight.
Any other comment? Alderman Bloomfield.
Sorry to ask another question. You mentioned outside TAFE, which is true. TAFE is renowned for having issues with parking for their students. Is this where the 17 parks will be removed or thereabouts?
The clearway.
Yeah, again, that's outside of this application. Clearly it relates to the broader proposal. In terms of loss of parking in that area, immediately outside TAFE, I don't believe any is lost immediately outside TAFE with the proposal. It looks like there is some maybe across the road, a modest, a small amount, maybe 2, but just bear with me. If I can have a look at the one on the other side of the road. So look, in fairness, this has been through a considerable public consultation process back in 2021. We spoke and wrote to all immediate landowners, and it did go out to broader community engagement. So this has been through a fairly rigorous process to get to this point. And look, there are compromises on both sides, but we believe it's a fair proposal in that sense. But from a planning point of view, it's a reasonably straightforward application. The only discretion relates to archaeological significance, and that is well and truly satisfied.
Yeah, look, I might just jump in quickly there. Look, I actually did have a number of similar concerns. I support the idea of improving or increasing our infrastructure for public transport and active transport, in this case, bike lanes. Did have some questions and concerns about the appropriate balance, especially on major arterial roads. But ultimately, we are in this sort of position where, in the past, or in other applications, you might have applications for increase in a residential development that will require a traffic impact assessment, and we have a major change to an arterial road that doesn't require one, and that's just due to the way that the planning scheme is written, and that's effectively what the state of play is on this. Is that correct, Director?
Yeah, that's correct. These changes within the Hobart Interim Planning Scheme area are planning exempt, but notwithstanding that detailed traffic impact assessment was undertaken at the time the council, as the road authority, considered this back in 2021.
And just another question, I suppose, I don't know if others, I was slightly confused initially reading the report only by the fact that there was elements in the planning report that were outlining bike lanes in roads that weren't even a consideration under our discretions here, given that they're exempt. We're only really looking at those ones that are under Sullivan's Cove. So I suppose, why were roads that don't fall into that included in the application if they're already exempt? Because I did a fair bit of work looking at this and going through it all, and I'm sure others did as well. But is there like, I assume there's some process here.
Yeah, look, it was, it's a fair call in relation to that might have generated some confusion, and we probably could have made that distinction a little bit clearer.
Fair enough. Yeah. Look, I like Alderman Bloomfield and Councillor Elliott have some concerns about, especially the nature of the bike lanes on the main arterial roads. I don't have too much of an issue with the ones on Bathurst Street. Don't have too much issue with them in principle. It's more just we have two roads there, in Argyle Street and Campbell Street. I drive on those roads to and from work on a regular basis, and they are very, very heavily travelled, and they do end up with a fair bit of congestion. I think doing anything that would limit the capacity of that road to process traffic, I think, is something that we need to really carefully consider. At the end of the day, I know council has its strategies. It has its elected members have their views on what the best forms of travel are and the least desirable forms of transport that we want people in Hobart to be taking. But at the end of the day, we're here to serve the community, and the majority of road users at the moment, whether by want or need, commute via car. So I do think we need to, whilst yes, we look for ways to increase the infrastructure around those, we do need to be mindful of the fact that we do have a duty to serve the interests of the majority of people in our city. That said, we are limited here in the discretions that we have, which is frustrating. And I suppose just as a comment, I had raised in the past a number of times the idea of clearways, which I think is being included in here, but for the purposes of a bus lane during peak hour. I appreciate that that's not what we're here assessing, and that didn't get considered because that wasn't what council asked the staff to do. But I'm of the view that a priority bus lane on those peak hour, on those arterial roads would have done more to get people out of their cars and onto other forms of transport by decreasing the amount of time the buses get stuck in traffic. That's just my view personally. On this, I think we're in a similar vein to, I think, sometimes the short stay applications. We're in a position where, while some of us might have concerns about some of the details of this, we might be bound by the planning scheme and the considerations to vote for it. In the main, I'm not so uncomfortable with that. There are a few aspects on Campbell Street in particular that I do have concerns about, but at the end of the day, they're not discretions. Salt, I'm sure you've got something to say.
Yeah, just thank you, Chair. Just listening to the debate, I suppose I feel the need to chip back in, seeing as I went first, but Campbell Street seems to be the problem. I know this is not within the acting as planning authority, but listening to the debate from those who are concerned, Campbell Street seems to be the kind of major concern point. Through you, Chair, to the Director, is it possible to put a recommendation in this that we provide further bicycle parking outside the TAFE to compensate for loss of car spaces, assuming that more students will be riding?
Look, I think you could include that as advice.
Advice, yeah. Thank you. And just to point out, so make no mistake that the congestion on Campbell Street is all driven by Davey Street congestion. Campbell Street already is compacted to 2 lanes out the side of the hospital, and that's never going to change now. That will always be the pinch point of Campbell Street. So making it, there's plenty of traffic engineers that will tell you that if you can keep a consistent number of lanes, that traffic flow is actually better because you end up with less merging conflict. And this is one of those cases where we're going from 3 to 2 and back to 3, and if we just keep it 2 the whole way, traffic will actually flow faster and more smoothly than it does currently. And I guess the final point that I would make is that every cyclist you see, every scooter you see is one less car in front of you, and that you do need to consider that, because if you see 20 cyclists go past you, that's 20 cars in front of you in the intersection. And so if we can encourage an extra 50 people to use that route, because clearly, as Alderman Barakis points out, it's a route that people want to use. People want to travel this way on this road, but at the moment it's so hostile to cyclists, no one's willing to go on a bike. So we're actually putting in a bit of infrastructure that supports the route choice of our residents and opens up the options for people to choose to ride. Thanks.
Councillor Kelly, saw your hand.
Thank you, Chair. I agree with Councillor Possum that there's a lot of aggro against bikers out there, and which I've experienced myself firsthand. And I've even had a few phone calls with people quoting me statistics that they've been counting, you know, that no one uses these lanes and all that. That to one side, I just think it'd be very prudent and have advice that we do a really good consultation program with the public to explain the benefits, instead of, you know, decisions being made and some of these circles with statistics in them just glazes people over. And I just think we've got to be a little bit more professional in selling this new concept, because there's a big anti-biking fraternity out there, and we've just got to try and win some of them over. It's just not going to happen overnight either. and it's just got to be a soft, slick campaign, I believe. So that'd be my advice.
Any other comments or questions? Councillor Alden Bloomfield.
The other question I had was regarding the clearway. When we got the clearway established, what was it, Quarry Street, there was a lot of issue because people would forget that there was a clearway early in the morning and it would stuff everything up. The whole point of the clearway was gone. And then we had to bring in tow trucks and so forth very quickly to basically get people to understand that clearway is a clearway is a clearway. If this was passed, would there be an effective campaign, same with the clearway, to establish that that will be taken quickly and seriously? Because my concern is if the theory doesn't work and we end up with something choked, imagine if you're down to one lane because of the two that you thought you had, the clearway's gone because someone forgot and parked their car there and we're waiting for a tow truck and it's peak hour. I don't want to see that. I really want to see a functional city. So would there be a system in place of a very strong tow truck campaign, whatever, to support the clearway, to establish good habits and behaviours so it could be absorbed appropriately?
Yeah, I mean, that's a bit of an operational issue and clearly not necessarily a planning consideration at this point in time, as previously indicated. But there will be a rigorous process, community, I suppose, engagement process around the introduction of these clearways. We've got the benefit of that experience with State Growth, who imposed the clearways in Macquarie and Davey. So we have some lived experience in that sense. There are significant penalties in breaches, and we know the state government has used those towing provisions that come with a significant penalty as well. So we believe that those types of measures will be explored as we get closer to implementation.
Any other comment or question? No. I think the item was moved by Councillor Harvey, so I'll put that. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against say no.
No.
Show of hands, all those in favour. And against?
Great outcome.
Great. We now move to 6.2.1, 60 Hampden Road. Anybody want to kick that off?
Yes, I moved the officer's recommendation.
Any questions or comments, Deputy?
Yeah, just a question in relation to parking and, you know, like, I imagine that this is a small animal veterinary clinic, but what are we likely to see as far as, given it's a fairly narrow footpath, as we found out, for those who attended the workshop last night, I think there were 4 of us there. You know, we know that the area in that part of Hampton Road is very, like the footpath is very narrow and crowded. So has there been any consideration of that toing and froing, like going into the building with crates of animals and larger animals and so forth?
Yeah, look, I think, no, in terms of the footpath width. We know it is constrained in places because of some temporary and permanent street furniture, but we don't necessarily, wasn't raised as an issue by our engineers. It's also, and it's probably no different to people walking in and out of there with furniture. as the current or previous use was used as. So we don't have any reported, issues associated with the movement of that sort of material. So we don't expect that we're going to necessarily see any issue with dogs and cats in crates.
Furniture doesn't usually bite though.
Yeah, and wriggle around, yeah.
It can be unwieldy.
Well, it can, I suppose. The other question is around like car drop-off, and did the application look at ambulance, like vet ambulances, animal ambulance?
Yeah, no, it didn't. I mean, it touched on
The waste removal?
yeah, waste removal, and there is a 5-minute zone within the vicinity. Close vicinity, so there was a perception that would be adequate for those need to drop off and the like. It's also important to note that there is a deficiency already of 5 spaces with the current use, so we needed to take that into account with the proposed use, which has a similar deficiency.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I've read the representations, Chair, and I hear those concerns around heritage and parking and access. But I suppose, really, from the report and based on some of the things that the director has said, I find it very difficult to say no to this. There will be what I imagine is a lot of local use as well as a vet clinic, because I think it's the only one in the area. It may augur well for the burgers of Battery Point.
Councillor Passop.
To the Director, through you, Chair, can we condition this and remove the sandwich board? I recognise that there's existing precedent for sandwich boards, but I also recognise the Accessibility Committee has specifically asked that sandwich boards be banned. I believe they're asking for permission to display one. Are there any grounds for review?
Look, I'd need to take that one on notice. I understand that sandwich boards are covered by bylaw, and we'd have to exercise, I think, refusal of sandwich boards through that bylaw. So we'd need to just check that.
How do we check it, Chairman? Sorry, but how do we check it? Like, it has to be, I think it has to be considered tonight, does it not?
Yeah, but I don't think, well, I'll seek some advice, but I don't believe that we've got jurisdiction for sandwich boards in the on the footpath. No different to anywhere else in Sullivan's Cove, in the city of Hobart. In the broader Hobart area, those sandwich boards are controlled by bylaw, not the planning scheme, because they put out and brought back in,
Sorry, Director, through you, Chair, again. The application though that we're reviewing tonight specifically asks for a sandwich board, and it's on multiple drawings.
Yeah.
So
It might do that, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it requires consent under the planning scheme for that approval.
Deputy.
I'm happy to seek some advice.
Surely we can have that as advice in it anyway.
We certainly could, that consideration be limiting the use of the sandwich board given the narrow nature of the footpath. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Director. I think that's something that, we should investigate more broadly as a council, that policy and that bylaw, but just because we've done something in the past doesn't mean we should do it in the future. These are causing, we've seen Battery Point just last night at the local area mobility plans, how cluttered and crowded these footpaths are and how unfriendly they are to disabled and pram users. So I think that's worth pursuing. if the committee's in agreement.
Any other comment?
Going to ban scooters? All right, I'll just sit back here.
Alderman Bluefield.
Fall asleep.
I think the application looks for scooters.
Alderman Bloomfield.
Making a comment? Same clutter.
I was just curious with this, it's not a very large area, so I don't see this being an enormously large practice. I also don't see any mention here that they're going to be after hours. There's places in this area that would have enormously greater use of parking and accessibility issues after, say, 5 o'clock. So it's not really, I don't think it's necessarily going to have the impact that I think people perceive, because there'll probably be like a day access with parking, and if it's only 1 or 2 practitioners, you're only looking at a couple of people at a time, so it's not an enormous requirement. So I suspect it would probably fit in better than what people perceive. But that was just my point of view, just the way I'm reading this and the way I'm reading the way it appears to be set up. If this was an after-hours practice and there was 12 practitioners, you know, you'd really start to wonder at the impact. But I don't see this here. I don't see this having a profound impact on parking or accessibility. And in fact, it's more likely to be used during the day when there's less business going on than, say, the early evening areas when there'll be a lot more things going on.
Any other comment or questions? Cool, none. That was moved by Councillor Basalt, I believe. I'll put that. All those in favour say aye. Against say no. Carried. Very good. We now move to Bathurst Street's
Move
shop.
that we withdraw this as per the applicant's request.
Thank you, Deputy. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against say no. Carried. That was just a withdrawal of the one that was pulled, Alderman Bloomfield. Yeah.
Bathurst Street.
Can I ask a question about the one that we've just
Sure.
discussed? Just to the director, is there any timeline or a reason for the second deferral request?
They want to consider the officer recommendation and whether there's any scope for amendment to that proposal.
The previous officer recommendation substantially different to this one?
Miss Abbey, you might have.
Through you, Chair. Heritage, the previous version was recommended refusal on both heritage and planning grounds. The small changes that they have made have addressed the planning grounds refusal, but not the heritage grounds refusal. So I think they would like to do a much more comprehensive review of what they'd like to do.
And just one more question, if I may, Chair. A neighbour has just queried whether or not they will need to make another representation when the DA comes back again after this deferral.
Yeah, that really depends on the scope of the changes that the applicant ultimately decides that they'd like to make. If they make quite significant changes, then they will need to make a new application. That will be re-advertised, and yes, another representation would need to be made. If they propose to make smaller changes, then it's possible that that could be imposed by the planning committee through conditions, and the original representation would still carry through.
Cool. We'll move on to the next item now. Where are we? 6.2.3, 43 Smith Street, change of use to visitor accommodation. Who wants to kick this one off? Alderman Zerko, move that. Any debate or comment or questions?
Chair, I'm interested in the Minister's comments about how we can use how the planning scheme enables us to refuse short stay accommodation. So I won't be supporting this tonight on the Minister's advice that we are able to use the planning scheme to vote against short stay accommodation. So I'll be exercising that tonight as per the Minister's advice. I can't recall exactly what his words were, but it was to the effect that we've created a system whereby the councils have the ability to refuse planning applications for short stay. So I'll assume that he's correct, and I'll take his advice and I'll be voting against it.
Any other comment? Councillor Kelly.
Could the, through you, Chair, could the Director enlighten me a bit more on the Minister's advice?
I haven't fully read the Minister's advice, but under the directives there are some performance criteria under which we are able to assess discretionary applications, and this is one of those. However, those performance criteria are a very low bar, and in this instance, well, they're limited in what you can refuse applications under, and those provisions are fully, in the officer's opinion, are fully satisfied, and hence the recommendation for approval.
I'll go to you in 1 second, Deputy. I suppose that applies to our consideration. The question about how high or low the bar is notwithstanding, that applies to any discretion that we have. We do have to base it in the context of the wording of those discretions. And I'll just note that the previous iteration of this for an en bloc application, I was within the council's scope to recommend refusal for this, and I was intending on voting to refuse this, but the discretions change when we have an application for a single dwelling, and we have had applications come in the past that are single change of uses that we've voted against and have been recommended to be voted against in the past, including that quote-unquote party house in Taroona. Sandy Bay. But look, yeah, we do have discretions there. We don't. There is. It's not a matter of that we bound to vote for every single application that comes through. But just like everything else, we think we do have to assess these things in the context of what the actual planning law says and not how we would like them to be. But I will go to the deputy. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Even despite what you've just said, can I just ask you through you to the Director why this is so different from the last application that was withdrawn by this applicant?
Yes, well, the previous application was for all of the 6 dwellings contained within this stratum to be converted to short-stay visitor accommodation. This application is but one of those dwellings. The remaining 5 remain as long-term rental, so as a dwelling, not a short-term visitor accommodation.
Is it not, another question through you to the Director, are we not looking at still against the performance criteria of Planning Directive number 6 for exemption and standards for visitor accommodation?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, so, and with that in mind, we could refuse this relating to the reasons for refusal last time?
Not in the officer's view, because it's a different application, different scale.
So it is a different scale, and obviously we had 6 applications before us at the one time, and now we only have 1 application at the one time. And perhaps next month we'll have another application for a neighbouring one, and the following month we might have another application for a neighbouring one, and so it goes. So would it only be feasible to refuse according to the officer's estimation if we got to number 6 out of 6 of these, because that would be seen to be the one to refuse at that point.
Look, I wouldn't like to speculate on what would constitute in terms of the number that would constitute a recommendation for refusal. I think we'd have to. We haven't fully turned our mind to that.
Chairman, I find this very, very frustrating, and in some ways, it's turning this into potentially turning this into a boutique hotel by stealth. So we have applications one by one, which potentially could come to us, and the applicant is in the room, so I guess we could ask her as to what her intent may be, but this shouldn't change how we look at this through a planning lens. We shouldn't change how we approach this. This is still going to have impacts on, and there was a representative who was a direct neighbour in Smith Street, but also a woman who lives on the other side in George Street who will be impacted upon. And you would have read her representation, Chair, as to the impact as a woman who is living there, who is renting at that place, and who no doubt will have impacts from visitor accommodation as part of that strata title. So I, like Councillor Harvey, find this absolutely incredible that this has come to us like this, and I'll be foreshadowing a motion to test what the Minister, if what the Minister is saying is actually truthful and warranted. As per the recommendation from last time, so that the proposal does not meet the acceptance solutions or the performance criterion with respect to clause 3E, in particular P1, A, B, C and D, and that the proposal does not meet the acceptable solution or performance criteria with respect to clause 3E, in particular P2, A, B, C and D. So the same reasons for refusal that were on the agenda item of the 3rd of May. I think we have a responsibility as a council to test this time. We know, we can probably all see what is likely to happen, and I feel that we should be pushing back on this one in particular.
Just Councillor Elliott. Then.
Oh, you don't mind? I am concerned that this council didn't like the 6 house application, and we pushed back, and they removed it, and the council took that as a win. And this applicant has actually gone out of their way, spent money and changed their mind with a view of meeting our demands. And yet we're treating them as if it's effectively poor faith. I'm really quite concerned that that we're just going to insinuate guilt when there is none. If application number 2 or 3 turn up, absolutely we might have the right to speak with these types of words and accusations, but I actually find it quite sad that we have to have this conversation when we genuinely have someone who's removed an application for 6, taken up 1, which one would have thought was a win for this council, but instead what we're doing is we're continuing to accuse them of somehow nefariously doing something untoward. You know, people do change their mind. People do have a willingness to meet what we ask of them. I think we have to meet them fairly and accept what they've actually come to us with. You know, we can't continue to be cynical.
Councillor Elliott.
Thank you. Yes, I'm troubled too about the theory of hypothetical applications clouding our judgment in terms of what's actually in front of us. We have a job to assess what is in front of us, not what we fear may be coming. I also would like to note that I suspect, I don't know, but the situation where we had an application for 6 changes of use is actually a situation this council's created by threatening to remove the ability to get permits. People are applying for permits. You created the situation ourselves. So, in my perspective, it's parking that is a discretion. The use of parking for short stay will be less than if it was tenanted. It's probably going to have 1 car rather than 4 cars. It's strata, but it has its own access, it's standalone, and we approve strata short stays on occasion. And I, through you, Chair, to the Director, I understand the situation in terms of the difficulty getting someone to represent us would apply to strata short stays also. Yes, thank you. I also am along the lines of Alderman Bloomfield's comments. I'm actually really disturbed to see some of the contempt that's being directed towards applicants of short stay. And that's radiating out from this council into the community, and people think that that's okay. It's not okay to treat people who are legally submitting applications under the planning scheme. They have a complete legal right to do so. To treat those people with contempt and moral judgment, I think is actually quite disgusting. If you have an issue with the planning regulations, hold the contempt towards the planning regulations, not against the people who are just following those rules of the day. I have a practicalities question around for the Director, around, through you, Chair, around people putting representations. Is there any further guidance we can give them? Because it seems that the vast majority of representations there are completely irrelevant to the planning scheme. I was just wondering, I feel for people that fill in forms when it's got no when there's no point to it. Is there anything further we can do at the back end, or just take that as a bit of feedback of how we can direct people as to what's relevant? Because calling people greedy and blaming people for whatever, that's not relevant. So it complies with the planning scheme. Its hypothetical applications are irrelevant, and I'll obviously be supporting this application.
Director, I think there was a question for you there.
Yeah, look, we'll take that on notice and have a look at the documentation that we provide.
Just way we can guide people through the form, perhaps. Thank you.
Just quickly, and then I see Councillor Kelly and Councillor Lohberger with their hands up. We've often heard in this committee and in this council and the previous council, when people come to the council with applications, and the line is, if applicants came to council with applications that met the planning scheme, then they wouldn't have an issue. It seems whenever we have short stay applications that are submitted that are compliant with the law of the day, they aren't afforded the same opportunity because the members of council don't like the law as it stands. At the end of the day, that cuts both ways. If we're expecting people to put in applications that comply with the law, that includes the parts of the law that we don't find convenient or we don't agree with. Appreciate there's some issues around short stay, and I appreciate there's some issues around with what the planning laws are of the day, and council's undertaking initiatives and to amend that. But until then, we should not be dragging applicants over the coals for doing what we expect of every applicant who submits a development application, which is submitting applications that comply with the planning law of the day. That said, the deputy did raise a good point, and I wouldn't go as far as to suggest that we test this, given that the outcome I expect would be the same as in every other case we've done this, which would come back to us without lawyers willing to take the case. But regarding the issue of, hypothetically speaking in this case, of course, we had a previous application of 6 units, which I think the officers were minded to recommend refusal, and I'd speculate and say the council was likely inclined that they were going to refuse it. If we had the hypothetical situation where we had one by one, those properties come up individually, under the sort of current interpretation of the planning law, council would have to assess each one of them individually, and likely the outcome would be that each one of those individually would be recommended for approval. At which point do we say that we need to look, the end outcome is the same, if the outcome for the 6 all at once was that it was going to have too much of an impact on the area, what's the threshold, and where do we say that there's death by 1,000 cuts in so far as reaching that same conclusion? And as a second question, is there any way to seek guidance from either the Planning Commission or the Tribunal, given that we're largely led and informed by precedences in the Appeals Tribunal? Is there any way to get guidance from them in how they would be minded to approach these sort of grey areas without having to make a decision that then gets appealed in order to set that precedence? Is there a proactive way to do that?
No.
Which is frustrating.
The tribunal will determine cases on the specifics of those appeals, and as has been asked previously, there's little to no appeal decisions on short-stay visitor accommodation under Planning Directive 6 that we can be guided by. So it is, and really you've simply got to go on the extensive consideration of various officers and consultants that we've approached over the years to try and defend Council's previous recommendations of refusal contrary to officer recommendations. So going on the way to numbers, provide some guidance as to the challenges that you've got under the current directive to refuse applications. But in terms of coming back to a threshold, as I indicated before, we haven't fully turned our mind to that. But we don't think one is.
Just as a follow-up before I pass over, so one's not, but one and then one and then one and then one and then one. Like that's I suppose the issue.
Yes.
We can't proactively go to the Appeals Tribunal. Are we able to seek some guidance from the Commission from an interpretation as to where those thresholds are in a reasonable sense?
Yeah, look, I suspect that the Commission would not be providing interpretive advice on those matters. They don't in other matters.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah.
Councillor Kelly and then Councillor Lohberger.
Thank you, Chair. Look, I feel very uncomfortable that if we sit here in the chamber to make decisions based on what we think someone may not do, it's extremely concerning to me. It also too portrays the applicant, I believe, in a very nefarious, bad light that's happening here today. I'm a bit distasteful, I'm just not quite comfortable about this. And also to say, well, let's drag her up here right now and start asking questions. I mean, what sort of process is that? It's just...
So disrespectful.
You know, whether it's just not done sort of thing to me. I feel very, very uncomfortable. Yeah, but I can fully understand what people are saying, or this might be done by stealth. We don't know that. You know, the applicant may be doing this in really good faith. It's spent a lot of money with the original applications, taken our advice, moved on, and come back with a single application. We just can't be presumptive with our decisions like this. Sure, there are other levers we might be able to pull. In fact, I don't think there are from what I'm hearing consistently. And I must say, once again, I'm getting very sick and tired of half to 1 hour debates on this same old thing, you know. Please, I'm just getting a bit sick of it. Also, how big a dud horse do you want to back? When the director sits here every other time this comes up, that you've got virtually no chance of getting up. We've got no one who's going to pick it up and run for us with it. And it's going to cost us between $20,000 and $50,000 to do it. I mean, what sort of derelict organisation would proceed on that basis? It's not the sort of place that I want to be in. Granted, there may be some suspicion or whatever, but we can't act in good faith or morality as an organisation.
Councillor Loberger.
Thank you, Chair. Look, through no fault of the applicant, I feel like we have conflicting advice here. The council officers clearly say we must approve these short stay applications, but the minister is clearly stating in public that we have the power to reject them. It's quite confusing. I'm of a mind to actually test that through the tribunal with this case and see if the minister was telling the truth. I mean, if the rejection is knocked back by the tribunal, or if we are...
Point of order.
I take that offence on the minister, whether the minister's telling the truth or not. I don't think that we're here to question the minister. We're here to discuss a planning matter.
Questioning the minister's statement on a planning matter. It's quite appropriate, I think.
You're referring to the fact that the minister has been untruthful.
I said, let's see if the minister was telling the truth.
You're referring to the minister being untruthful.
Could you call on the...
I don't know what comments. I don't know exactly which comments we're referring to. So I'd just hope that we avoid in the process of debating a development application reflecting on people outside of what this application is. I'm sure that's one for discourse outside of this chamber, but let's avoid personal reflections on individuals not in this chamber.
All right, well, so just going on, I think if the rejection is knocked back by the tribunal, or if we're unable to actually obtain a planner to defend the decision because it's clearly indefensible, then I think there are some questions to answer outside of this chamber. Thank you.
Alderman Zerko.
Yes. Look, I'm with Councillor Kelly here. I find this extraordinary. Are we here to deal with this under planning grounds, or are we here to deal with this on personalities and who the minister is and whatever have you, and who's being truthful or untruthful? It's absolutely ludicrous. I think, you know, I just don't get... I've been sitting here listening to this debate, and I really question whether or not elected members really understand what they're in this chamber for at this point in time. And you know what? I'm going to do something that Councillor Dutta does, because you're really going around discussing matters that are not relevant to this application. I put that the motion be put now, please. Thank you. I've heard enough.
Motion that the motion be put. That concludes the debate on that. So, all those in favour of the motion that the item be put, say aye.
Aye.
Again, say no.
No.
Show of hands, all those in favour. And against? That's lost, okay. I've got Councillor Basalt and then Councillor Sherlock.
Thank you, Chair. Through you to the Director, should this be refused tonight, am I correct that the process would be that it would go to mediation as the first step?
It would depend on whether the applicant appealed Council's decision. If they did, then yes, the first step in that process is to explore the possibility of mediation.
And hypothetically, through a mediation scenario in this instance, given that the concern is that we have seen an application for 6 apartments that the applicant currently owns, would it not be feasible that we could ask for evidence that they don't intend on this hypothetical scenario of doing all 6, i.e. provision of a long-term lease for the remaining 5 as part of mediation?
Look, we could always ask, but I don't think it would be something that the applicant would be forced to provide.
Sure. And in light of that, if they, I know we're getting into hypotheticals, but if they didn't provide that, then that could be grounds to say, well, there is intent here, we've seen the original, and take it beyond mediation.
Well, this, again, intent is not a basis on which to refuse or to mount a case against a future applicant, against the applicant. The application that would be before a tribunal is the one that you've got in front of you. Applicants can speculate, or councils or jurisdictions can speculate as much as they like, but you're only required, and you can't explore beyond that, what's before you tonight. Legally.
Thank you. Yeah, I won't go to further questions. I'll just go to debate. I would say that equally you cannot forget what you have been shown. We have been given evidence in the past that this was the intent, and that I cannot remove that from my decision making because I have seen that application. And I think that under performance criteria P1, that the original application for 6, I know that's not what we're debating tonight, however, the original application for 6 doesn't comply with a number of things. P1 clause B, likely increase in noise, P1 clause C, the use and its compatibility with surrounding character and uses within the area, and P1 clause D, retaining the primary residential function of the area. Bearing in mind Smith Street is a pretty small street of around 35 houses. So to Alderman Barakis' point, that there appears to be no avenue in this process should we receive the 6 in sequence. There's no avenue to go back to the original officer's recommendation for refusal for the 6, which is kind of nonsense, and I think that's worth testing legally. So on those grounds, because it does not comply with performance criteria P1, I can't support this one. And I have, in the past, made a strong comment about not going down this track with Airbnb, but this is a different scenario.
Councillor Sherlock.
Question. So this is a strata title, is it? So under Directive 6, are we allowed to refuse applications? Is that one of the directives? And why is it different? Could you just educate me on that, please?
So because it is an application that involves a stratum, then it instantly becomes a discretionary matter. Short-term visitor accommodation becomes a discretionary matter. And then you have to determine the application under the performance criteria that apply. You have to be found that that application does not satisfy those performance criteria in some way. The officers are strongly of the view that it satisfies all of those performance criteria, and therefore it's recommended for approval. Now, I understand that some elected members may have an alternative view.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's probably really key, the last point that you've said, that there are alternative views. And as I've sat here many times and refused Airbnb applications. And so I'm not making a judgment on the applicant at all. My personal views matter not when I'm making these kinds of decisions, as always. And I think in my time on council, I think I've said yes to one Airbnb short stay accommodation permit on the basis of various different reasons. Either that it could be there was a foreshadowed motion, and therefore I supported that instead. So this to me is not a personal matter. I am not making a judgment call on the individual, because I think, as Councillor Elliott rightly pointed out, that's not our role. And so I'm not doing that. But that said, as the Director has pointed out, we do have different views that we can take on this matter. And it's consistent with how I've voted in the past, and so I'll be voting in the same way as I've always done.
I think we'll move to wrapping up there. I will just say, I think it's important that we do separate and and it's been a interesting and probably useful for the future discussion around how we interpret these matters of thresholds. But I don't think, and especially when we start talking about what we think is going to happen with future applications, we do need to be, in no other planning application type is it appropriate to reflect on what we think hypotheticals are going to be with future applications. We can only assess the application that's in front of us today. And I understand that causes some frustrations for a number of people, but it's the same interpretation that we take for every other type of planning application. I think we need to be very, very careful when it comes to going down this road. And we do need to be mindful of what the outcomes have been when we've sought to test short stay applications in the past. The outcome's always been the same. So with that, I'll put the motion moved by Alderman Zuko, I think. Right, all those in favour say aye. Aye. Against say no. No. Show of hands, all those in favour.
Alderman Zuko, Councillor Elliott, Alderman Bloomfield, Councillor Kelly, and Alderman Baraka.
And against?
Councillor Sherlock, Councillor Purcell, Councillor Logan, Councillor Harley, and Deputy Lord Mayor. That's 5-5. So that motion's lost.
I move the foreshadowed motion as read out before, Chair.
This loses, it's no decision.
Okay, is there any debate or is the debate being had on
we
that?
don't have to debate
I think
it.
we can, if no one else has any other comment to make, I'll put that as moved by the Deputy. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against say no.
No.
No. Show of hands, all those in favour. And against?
Alderman Zuko, Councillor Elliott, Alderman Bloomfield, Councillor Kelly, and Alderman Baraka.
So Chair, that means the Director has the decision
I'll
on
say.
Yep.
It's hardly a win, is it? You know, like it's hardly a win.
Sorry, didn't say it was a win.
What's the right decision?
I'm not being smart, the Director makes a decision. He's entitled to it, that's under the Act.
We'll move,
Take the Minister on again.
we'll move on to report 7.1, advertised applications report. Anybody like to move that? Councillor Salt. Ms Aby, do we have anything to note?
Chair, there are a couple of items in the public domain. Item number 4 on the list is a new lift in the Catfiddle Arcade, and item number 3 is new signage on the existing library building.
I have a question, please, Chair.
Councillor Elliott?
Do we have anything big or substantial coming down the line? Any good big hotels? Anything in the pipeline?
There have been some conversations around hotel development in the, I think, Campbell-Argyle Street, up at Campbell-Argyle Street location. So,
Okay. All right.
And
So this list is only when it's a formal application that's been lodged. Yeah, it's keen to see more accommodation in the city.
I was going to, I'll go to the Deputy in a second. I was also going to comment on the how barren the list seems to be of anything substantial. I don't just mean substantial so far as dollar value, but just substantial in the nature of what's here. We don't really seem to have much actual building of anything.
yeah, look, I think it's reflective in, across the economy that there's a degree of nervousness, particularly around inflation. So I know business confidence has moved into the negative territory, and that's reflected in the construction.
Well, this is the outcome that the RBA wanted, but Deputy.
Did Councillor Purcell move this? Did you move this?
Yeah,
Yes, yeah, it would be terrible if it was a reflection of you being in the chair.
Indeed. Councillor Purcell.
Just on the previous debate, through you, Chair, to the Director, there is the fragrance development that was approved at Tribunal going on Davey Street. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
That's coming back for redesign.
Is it? So we're expecting a... Ms.
Through you,
Ivey?
Chair, there is movement on that. The applicant's looking at potentially some relatively minor changes, so that might actually be a new DA that comes through the system.
Great.
Given that the previous version went to the tribunal, so we have limited ability to allow for changes to the development that's actually constructed.
Do you know, through you, Chair, do you know the size of that hotel as it went through the planning appeal?
Look, I think it was around the 150 bed, something.
150 beds, great.
Yeah.
150 new beds, awesome.
Yeah, in that order, and there was there were a number of apartments attributed to that as well.
Very good. Thank you.
Yeah, and just the other fragrance application at the former con, as well as the one across the road, which we compared the height to. How have they got?
Yeah, well, look, they've got approvals in place. The Conservatorium of Music site in Sandy Bay Road, that was an apartment development of significant size. No movement so far as construction on that. And in relation to the site next door to the council centre in Davey Street, again, that's got approvals in place, but no sign of construction on that. The fragrance developer obviously has a site under construction in Macquarie Street for a hotel. They've got that one next to the Ibis, so it may be that they await the completion of that before commencing on the Davey Street site.
On the other side of Wilmot Street, with Moda.
Yes, again, again that's an apartment proposal, apartment development, but Ms Abbey, there has been some dialogue with council officers to work through the conditions of approval, but yeah, but no formal building approval at this point in time, I suppose.
Through you, Chair, that's correct. There hasn't been an application for a building permit as far as I'm aware. There was one minor condition that needed to be finalised. There were some trickier ones which have been addressed, so hopefully they'll start construction on that one in the near future.
They must be coming up to their 2 years fairly soon.
It probably is, but we may have extended that. We may have extended that. They've got, through the extension process, up to 6 years to commence.
Through COVID, was it?
Well, under the Act, it's probably a bit over that, a bit longer than that. So, but certainly pre-COVID, it was 6 years you had until you could commence on that.
Thank you.
If there's no other comment or questions, I'll put that as moved by Councillor Basalt. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against say no. Carried. We now move to 7.2 Delegated Decisions Report.
So moved.
Thank you, Councillor Harvey. Any comment or questions?
No.
Yeah. I'll put that. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against say no. Carried. Questions without notice. Are there any questions without notice?
What's that one?
Great. Council, we'll go bang, bang, bang. Councillor Lohberger.
Just through you to the director, has there been a recent change of use at the Fountainside Hotel? Because things seem to be happening there. The fences have all disappeared and there seem to now be quite a lot of people in the hotel.
Yes. No, there isn't a change of use per se, but we understand that it is being occupied.
Right, thank you.
Councillor Basalt.
Thank you, Chair. Through you to the director. Could you provide a either you can take it on notice or you can give me an estimate, I don't mind, whatever's easier, but for how many apartments and hotel rooms are currently approved pending construction or construction partway through in the city?
I'll take that one on notice,
Thanks.
Chair. I think there is certainly some information on our website, but I'll provide the detail.
Yeah, it sounds like from the previous debate that it'd be in excess of 500 between apartments and hotel rooms. So
certainly in that figure.
fantastic. Thank you, Director.
Councillor Sherlock. Oh, the agenda, sorry. If there's no other questions, before I ask someone to move that we close the meeting, I will just note that this is the last meeting that we'll have Director Neil Noy in the chair. He's moving on to a different role. So I thought I'd just take a quick time to say thank you for your service in this role. We'll welcome Ms. Aby in future meetings, but Neil's always been a steady hand in the short time that I've sat in on planning committee meetings, and he's always given frank and fearless and very wise counsel when we're making planning applications. And as those that are new in the council might be aware, it's very technical and sometimes very difficult and hard to unpack place, and Mr. Noy always gives very useful and very, very clear advice. So I'd just say thank you for your service in this role. Look forward to working with you in your other roles, and I don't know if anybody else wants to say anything, or Deputy?
Yeah, thanks, Chair, and thanks for starting off on those words. Obviously, the Director was by my side when I was Chair of Planning for many years for his sins. So again, I'd also like to say thank you for how you've really provided that guiding hand in relation to us as mere mortals in that planning, in the world of planning, because it's not easy. So having that clear interpretation from the Director has been very good. But I do also welcome Ms. Aby to the role as well.
Any other comment, or Councillor Sherlock?
Yeah, thank you. I'd also like to say thank you for starting that off, and thank you very much, Director, for being always wonderful and always available, whether it be the weekends and I have to talk to you about various different issues that I'm having difficulty understanding or needed clarification. You were always there, you always picked up the phone, and you always had really just this tone, I think, that you have, and this your demeanour to convey information in just the most beautiful way. And I think I did.
But patience as well. Yeah.
Sounds like a eulogy.
Yes, it does. And I think I did have a joke, the joke at the dinner the other day. I won't say it here in the joke. But yeah, it's really, really been wonderful working alongside you, and thank you for being there, and look forward to working with you too. Thank you.
Anyone else?
As one of the new members here, certainly I came here with very little knowledge in planning, and I've been very grateful that you have simply let us, all of us new people, or you haven't judged us, you've simply allowed us to learn. You've allowed us to make mistakes and be better for it, and done it in such a way that we can carry this room and do well. So thank you.
Thanks, Neil.
Question through you to the Director. Mrs.
Take it on notice.
I will to some degree, in a weird, strange sort of way. But I will be here in the room at some stage. There will be various planning policy matters that will need to come before this committee as the planning authority, and yeah, it's been 17 long years in this chair, so I've seen.
It corresponds with me. You're the only planning director I've ever known.
But the decision to assist in another area has been made a lot easier because of Karen's ability and energy and knowledge to step up into this role. So it's in very good hands, and of course as important, you've got Rachel here as well, that keeps the division together, and will be also assisting Karen in that role continually. So yeah, it's sad to move on, but technically it's a 12-month gig, but you might have me back if I'm not I don't do a good enough job in the other one. But thank you very much for those kind words, and I'm sure Bill will have many after this meeting.
Yeah. Well, and just going off what Councillor Sherlock said, the patience and the ability to just boil down what can sometimes sound like black magic to some of us mere mortals. But I remember the number of times when I'd ring up and at 8 o'clock at night, and I'm like, mate, I'm so sorry to be calling you late at night. You're like, no, it's all good. Like, it's all fine. And that's my questions. I'm like, oh, geez, I feel terrible. But no, it's thank you, mate, and we'll miss you. And yeah.
And the ability to give the same answer multiple times
Yeah.
without rolling his eyes once. Noticeably.
We'll miss you, Neil, in that chair, but
Thank you.
we'd better move on. Can somebody please move that we close the open, open the close? Thank you, Deputy. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.